but that comes to my third point, which is it's a large point, but I'm trying to make it short. So there is really no such thing as a human person. And what I mean by that is that whenever you take one of these schools of thought, be it psychology, be it anthropology, be it marketing science, be it economics, you're already putting on a lens that has boundaries between the concepts that you're talking about. So you have, let's just start with, it's really hard to even specify a physical specimen of the human species because we have as much bacterial cells as we have human cells, which means that our bodies actually are consistent of human cells and a bunch of other organisms. And basically, if you think about that, you have a tube from your mouth to your butt, and whatever is inside that tube isn't part of your body. That's why we have lining. So the bacteria living inside that tube won't get inside our body. So we have gut microbiome that is not technically part of our body, but it lives within the body. But it has critical functions. It breaks down our food, it creates many of our hormones, but we have a lining that goes through the whole system, that has a system that only these particles get to go inside the body and these stay out. And we just shove stuff that comes in and out our whole system. So even that's kind of hard to say. So if you scrape all the bacteria out of your inside your body, which are technically outside your body, you just have a tube that keeps them, you're like a donut shaped actually. So if you take those bacteria away, they have their own DNA. And if you take those away, you die. Okay, if you take half of them, you just get sick. And so what is the lining between that? Are they part of you? Well, you need them to live. So technically they are, technically they aren't. 7% of your DNA is viral DNA. We have a placenta. I mean, us as in mammals have a placenta because we stole viral DNA, or viral DNA got infused with our DNA. Those kinds of weird things. And viruses aren't even technically alive. But still, if we didn't have that viral DNA, we wouldn't give live birth. That's just one way of looking. I know this goes pretty deep, but intro sessions kind of go. And then you think about yourself, and your conscious isn't really located in your brain or created, but we really don't know how it's done. But we do know that there are several independent entities, let's say them, inside your body and your nervous system that partly work autonomously and partly under your control. And you can't really separate them either. Or I mean that there are ways to separate them, but it's really hard to draw the line when you start being you and you stop being something else. And you know, you're not the same person as you were a child, not only psychologically, but also none of your cells or none of our particles were the same because they all get changed out. And we have layers of intelligence, we have layers, we have different social selves, we have different inner selves, we have literally different consciousness between the hemispheres of the brain. So your left brain and your right brain technically has an own consciousness that can be literally interacted with separately, that they don't know about each other. You can give a signal to your, we'll maybe go through that when we go like a mini lecture on the self, but there are some freaky things when you separate the two halves of your brain. So you're not really that either. So your consciousness is just kind of like a committee doing stuff. And this goes down to your brain structure, and there's no one there. There's just this combination of different things that work. And you don't live by yourself either. You live by interacting with other people, and you live with interacting around the world, and then without that you die too. So, and you use me to get information right now. We use the internet all the time. We use each other all the time. So what is the minimum? And there is no single unit of a family. When you start thinking about what constitutes a family, is the dog the family, is the ancestors your family, are the becoming unborn children the family? Like even that's not a unit, and it's this weird blur that whatever stage you look at it, you have different actors in different ways. Go down deep enough, you get bacteria fighting with neural cells. If you go up enough, you have, you're living in a new democracy and sitting on the shoulders of all your ancestors, and you get the time dimension in that. So that the one thing I want to kind of dispel is that there is a single of anything almost that comes to conscious beings or psychology. We always have to look at the whole system of it. So you're a being that has a family, that has a brain structure, that has a body. And the more we learn about intelligence and consciousness and the self, the quality of living, we also learn that it's dependent on physical things like movement, goal orientation, those kinds of things. So if you couldn't move, you couldn't really think, or at least we don't know if you could create something that doesn't move in things, because thinking is 10 steps forward from the first you have to kind of, if you have to move, you have to sense. If you have to sense and move, then you have to have an idea of which movement is better. When you have sensing and moving and which way is better, you start having algorithms that do goal orientations. When you have goal orientations, you might have two different goals that compete. When you have two different goals to compete, you have to have a value judgment, which one is better. When you have a value judgment, which one is better, you have to create values and model more and those kinds of things. So that the reason why I started ranting about this is because I have extra time, but also we have a biological basis. Let's call it firmware, that has 3.8 million years of evolution behind it. And whatever tools and mechanisms that biology is giving us, one of them is that we can model and interact with our world so greatly that we can do abstract thinking. And we can do abstract thinking and extrapolate in time, which means we start building stuff like personalities, concepts of family, concepts of concepts. Then we can start doing culture. So we start learning stuff and we start doing culture. And then part of that culture is the sociological megastructure. And then we create stories that everybody we create stories so other people can understand that what we are going through and what we could be going through together and those kind of things. Those stories create a society, culture, sociology, cultural pieces of information and technology like democracies, laws, rules, schools, body of learning, that kind of stuff. And it kind of depends on which level you go is what you're looking for. So you have the biologist looking at the biology, then you have some psychologists looking at the experiencing single entity, and then you have social psychologists looking at the entity working together with other entities. Then you have sociologists and economists thinking about, those entities which are in those groups, try to maximize their well-being or utility or whatever, and they start doing interaction and how that works. And then you have political theory and philosophy on top of that. Well, if you can think about the structures and the theories and the exchange and think about the thinking, then it becomes philosophy and that kind of thing. And all these schools look at the same phenomenon of living and thinking and experiencing in different levels. And I think it's prudent to understand that these are distinct levels and they all exist. Sometimes you have this bogged down, say, sociologist or some relativist that only look at one layer and they don't see that there's a layer above it and a layer beyond it. Or then you go to a hardcore biologist who doesn't seem to understand what the abstract strategizing on top of the biology has to do with the biology, or the cultural gene coevolution, that you'll go actually read a paper on that later. So I just want to make a point that once we go into the nitty-gritty little details and then we see how the retina changes your perception of the outside world into an idea in your head, and you start thinking about the idea as a collection of other ideas, and you start thinking that should that somehow orient your action or something like that. It's good to remember that whenever you zoom down or you zoom up, there is a layer on top of it and a layer below it, and sometimes when we do research too narrowly, we forget that there is this huge tapestry which makes everything, I don't want to say complicated, because it's not like it's unknowable, but sometimes we're just too myopic when we look at these phenomenon. And it's good to remember that not everything is explained by social constructs, not everything is explained by biology, and not everything is explained by culture, and not everything is explained by economics, but all of them contribute quite a lot to it. And sometimes I think we see, and even some courses I've been taking are very bubble-like, and they're bubble-like, of course, because they're trying to teach a single thing, but it's sometimes good to see and understand that the bubble exists in a sea of bubbles, and that's what we're kind of trying to do here, because we're going to go very nitty-gritty, very small and narrow-minded. This is when we're trying to sell you this stuff, I'm going to do this. And as a consumer, if somebody's trying to sell you this, they're going to do this. How should you respond? These are the mechanisms why they are. But it's good to remember that the mechanisms are there because of, you know, some sea slug ate a snail a billion times before crawling onto land or something like that. And don't worry if you're already falling asleep at this point, but it's something that will make sense in the end.